I'm Mike Hogue of Lily House, and this is video 4 in our series on permaculture and money. And this time we'll be discussing investing in transforming our lives and world. In our last video, we discussed how actually we're way wealthier than we think we are when we only focus on money and financial capital. Actually, we have all of these rich resources in terms of our relationships and our natural world that we can put to our use to get what we want out of life. This time, we'll be talking about an even more important thing, which is how we can invest all of those forms of capital into what Bill Mollison called regenerative assets that really have that super-powered force of negative entropy that we can put to work in our lives. Bill Mollison in the Designer's Manual and Rosemary Morrow in her Earth Users Manual called this asset class analysis or asset types analysis, and they broke them down to a few different types, starting with those assets that feature entropy, that break down and have to be replaced, and they called those degenerative assets. The idea is every time you buy one of those, you are putting a noose around your neck. You're putting a weight on yourself that you're going to have to carry forward into the future, always maintaining that asset. This is something that Kim and I have really started to talk about whenever we make a purchase. Are we buying something that's going to be a degenerative asset for us and give us an entropy debt? So if we want to avoid giving ourselves that debt, it's at least better to invest in a durable asset. These are consumer goods that last and maintain value for a long time, or even appreciate in value. So rather than going to, say, Target and buying a cheap pair of shoes or a pair of plastic plates that are designed to fall apart in a single season, so you have to buy the next one, you can take that same money and go to a place like an antique shop and buy something that is going to last for generations and perhaps even appreciate in value over time. But where we really begin to accumulate value and wealth in our lives is when we take our money and instead invest in generative assets. These are things that can be used to produce a good or a service. They're durable, but they also produce something that we would need and that we're already buying. So instead of buying cider, we might buy a cider press and press our own cider. Or instead of just purchasing our housing through renting or buying a house for ourselves, if we buy a house that we can also share, then we can use that as a productive asset. But where we really begin to powerfully harness the energy of nature is when we invest in the final category of assets, procreative assets. These are productive assets that will produce a good or a service for us, but that also have the ability to self-replicate. These are things like an apple tree, which produce apples, but also can be used to sell the scionwood if we get the right variety, which is the important thing. It's only a generative asset if you're using it to generate something, not if it's just sitting in the basement. And it's only a procreative asset if it's like procreating and reproducing itself. When we put that power to work for us, we're grabbing a hold of something with a potential for exponential growth. But what that means is we don't just get any apple. We have to be strategic about what we're investing in. Not all of our investments are going to be of the same value. Some apple trees, especially if they're a new variety or rare, will be more valuable as a procreative asset than an empire. Before we continue on, here's a quick pop quiz. What kind of asset is this? That's right, it's kind of a trick question because it depends on what you do with it. But if all you're doing is mowing it, then all you're doing is putting new energy into it to keep it from going to chaos, and it's a degenerative asset. Oh, how about this one here? Again, it's a trick question and it depends on what you do with it. If all you're doing is tilling and flushing your soil fertility out into the ocean, then this could also be a degenerative asset that sucks up your time and your energy, and maybe it gives you a little bit back in return, but it doesn't help you harness that regenerative power that will superpower your future and really transform your life. And now we're really starting to see this whole perspective on farming and gardening and activism that Mollison was really getting into, trying to give people an alternative to this insane global corporate system by allowing them to take back control of meeting their own needs. But really, this is all about making smart investments. And really, this is the oldest form of farming there is. In fact, farming has always been about making smart, regenerative, land-based investments. It's a way superior idea than the idea of focusing on getting income from, say, selling the same 10 vegetables that everybody else at the market is selling. Or to put that in the cliche kind of way you always hear as a money tip, the poor seek jobs, the middle class seek careers, the wealthy invest and make passive income. This is really the kind of perspective that Bill Mollison put to use in his own life, and he was trying to get us to do the same, because he wanted us to be empowered. He wanted us to be empowered politically. He wanted us to transform our own lives and teach other people how to do the same. He wanted us to take degenerative assets, like this horrible lawn I bought with our house, and turn it into productive, perennial systems that give back year after year with little input into them. So now we have a whole plan for taking degenerative, life-draining systems that look like this one, and instead turning them into dynamic, wealth-accumulating systems that look like this one. And when we do that with our lives, it looks kind of like this. This is my personal economic diagram now, where I recognize that I have way more forms of capital available to me that I can put in to the system. And then once it's there, I don't just put it in my bank account and put it back out. I invest it into regenerative assets that will superpower my life by growing in value and wealth and productivity over time. Things that will simultaneously grow my time capital by saving me time. Then on the other end, I try to keep all of the things that I can cycling back into the system instead of just going out into nowhere. So let me give you a few examples that any of us can use right now to start investing and transforming our own lives. First off, start investing in perennial plants and perennial gardening. When you invest in an annual, it's a one-off and it's done. It's an input and an output. But when you put your money into perennials, it's like putting it into the bank. For a second example, whenever possible, we can invest in creating permanent, no-dig, deep mulch garden beds that will last for a long time. Whereas dig beds, you have to redo every year. These beds will be banking your time into the future. And better yet, if you invest in a whole permaculture garden or forest garden like my hero Colette O'Neill here, then you're really creating a system that will pay you back year after year after year. And the better you design it to be truly valuable as an investment, the more it will pay you back. And there are all sorts of regenerative investments, depending on what our interests are, that will have that same procreative and productive power that make us wealthier over time. And that includes people and regenerative organizations. And then there's the most important regenerative investment of all, which I call wind horse, which are things that follow your passion, that make you want to jump out of bed in the morning and get to work. Because if we get that right, we superfuel our lives.